And it's recording. So welcome everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you here at our seminar series. The theme today is cybersecurity and national security. My name is Kaunert. I'm Professor of Policing Security at the University of South Wales. I'm also Professor of International Security at Dublin City University, and I'm the Director of the International Centre for Policing and Security at the University of South Wales. Now, co-hosting together with me is Professor Sarah Leonard. She's also Professor of International Security at the University of South Wales and Jean Monnet Professor at Dublin City University. Our first speaker of today will be Dr. Tombari Sibe. He's a visiting fellow with us here at the University of South Wales, and he's also the CEO and the lead forensic examiner of Digital Footprints Limited. Then our second speaker is Dr. Raschid Muller. He's a cybersecurity executive and also adjunct professor of cybersecurity at Capital Technology University in the United States. And our final speaker of today is Dr. Ethem Ilbiz. He's a senior research fellow with us at the International Centre for Policing and Security at the University of South Wales. Now, just to give you a little background of our centre is, of course, predominantly focused on policing, but also on international security more broadly. This event also fits with our Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Virtue. So we also thank the European Commission for their support for all of our activities. It also links up with our Jean Monnet network on EU counterterrorism and a number of the other activities that we have, such as the Jean Monnet module on EU hybrid warfare, EU hybrid. So I thank the European Commission for all of this support. And without further ado, I hand the floor to Tombari. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your presentation. You're still muted.
Apologies. A very good afternoon to you all, and a pleasure to be the first speaker. Basically, what I'm going to do here is to just lay the background, the foundation for the others to build on. So without wasting much of the time, I'll just go straight into the short presentation, which I have titled Cybersecurity and National Security, Background and Contextualization. So I'll start with an opening line, which is a statement by Lisa Monaco, Assistant Attorney General for National Security, that's in the United States. The reason why I tried to start with this is to show us that the issue of cybersecurity as a national security issue didn't start today, and I just quote her. We often think of national security threats, that of catastrophic terrorist attack, as questions about prevention. But the cyber threat is not simply looming, it is here, and it's present and growing. So having said that, I'll take a quick tour at some background issues. First of all, the last few decades have seen rapid digitalization. There's been a lot of technology adoption almost in all spheres of our lives. And while that has been very fantastic and made life easy for us, it has also introduced emerging issues such as cybersecurity risk and so on and so forth. So basically, the essence of this webinar is to examine this, how it has moved from just being, a household risk or a domestic risk or an office risk to a national security issue. Now, the issue of cyber threats, it didn't start today. As far back as the President Reagan era, that debate had started, as suggested by Cavalti in his paper. And that debate has, burgeoned and bloomed from then to a point where it is no longer seen as an isolated debate. It is now at the mainstay. It's now a mainstay of national security. It's at the center of national security. And the debate has also moved from just a mere debate to actual securitization of the cyberspace, which is basically moving that domain to being captured as a national security issue. As we all know today, the cyberspace is seen as the fifth domain, in wars, in warfare. That's apart from land, sea, air, and space. You now have the cyberspace, which is the fifth domain. And national security has grown beyond just, issues of protecting critical national infrastructure, which is basically how it started. In fact, the whole essence of the securitization of cyberspace was a defense mechanism which was targeted basically at protecting critical national infrastructure of nation states. But that has gone beyond that. As we all know, today, national security is beyond just a military agenda. It is also capturing things like, economic parameters, economic issues, food security, and all of that. So, but all of these issues of the cyberspace also comes with its unique complexities. Complexities such as the borderless nature of it, which ordinarily is a good thing, but the same way it is good is the same way, adversaries can leverage that and launch wars from you from other climes, other territories, other jurisdictions. And unlike the times past 50, 100 years ago, where you have to plan warfare basically with boots on the ground and with heavy artillery, now with a little computer in front of you, people can launch cyber attacks that can basically put thousands and millions in threat. Another complexity is that it is open to everybody, both state and non-state actors. Even things like crimeware, cybercrime as a service, or crimeware as a service has also opened the door to very complex set of tools to people who are not themselves even very smart IT people. Another thing is the rapidly evolving threat landscape or technological landscape, the fact that there's a lot of new technologies coming in every day, and with them also comes new threat actors, emergent issues, one of which is a cyber security issue. So the next set of slides, I think about 6, 7 slides, I'll just share some infographics, which was graciously done by We Are Social, which captures some of the key statistics. I want to show why cybersecurity is serious business, why it has to be at the center of national security. Estimated population of the world as of January 2022 is about 7.91%. Out of that amount, or out of that number, 5.31 billion have unique mobile phones, and then internet users about 4.95. That means that 62.5% of the world's population have access to the internet. That means that 62.5% could potentially use internet for good and also for bad. So something with that level of patronage deserves to be taken a closer look at. Also looking at in terms of growth, because there's been a lot of rapid growth over the years. So you see that in a space of 1 year, total number of internet users grew by 4%, or that's about 192 million new internet users per annum. The average internet user, according to this infographic on your screen, uses about 6 hours, 58 minutes per day on the internet. Again, if you interrogate that figure, that leaves you with a lot to ponder about. And then this very beautiful graph shows a nice growth pattern for internet users over time. You can see that as of January 2012, total internet users was about 2.177, and that has grown by over 100% as of 10 years later in January 2022 to 4.95 billion. So there is a rapid, technology adoption, rapid internet adoption over time, and with this comes, a new set of risk, emerging risk. And then the nice graph nice map you see shows internet adoption at a continental level. One reason why I decided to share this is that the level of internet adoption can have a direct correlation with how a nation perceives cyber threats, or how active they are also in the cyberspace. So you see North America and Europe, most of Europe, Western Europe and North Europe, they average the 90s. North America 92, Western Europe 94%, Northern Europe 98% in terms of internet adoption. And you see Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, going below the 50% mark, apart from South Africa. So this perhaps is a reflection of not just their state of readiness, but also their understanding or their adoption of cybersecurity, and by extension, their state of readiness or their capability maturity in this regard. Now, this, which you have on your screen, is also another very beautiful illustration that shows why cybersecurity has to be taken very seriously as part of national security. So you see this chart here shows the most targeted industries. Targeted by cyber criminals, whether private or nation state actors. The first 5 items there are things that has to do with national security. You see power and utilities, that's critical national infrastructure. Also petroleum in almost every country is also, your petroleum infrastructure falls under your critical national infrastructure. Also transportation, water, food, these are national security issues. And these are the top 5 industries most targeted by cyber criminals. Therefore, it is imperative that cybersecurity is captured. In fact, it is already at the center of it. The next slide looks at the global risk report of the World Economic Forum, both in the short term and in the long term. Also, cybersecurity features very prominently, featuring on number 8. You can see widespread cybercrime and cyber insecurity, featuring both as a short-term risk and as a long-term risk to humanity. So, having laid this background, we'll just look at the contextualization itself, national security, which has over the years had different kinds of interpretations, but there's a common definition among all of this. However, the boundaries of it has changed over time because of the complexities of what entails national security, because the definition has broadened to accommodate changing dynamics. Also, before now, it used to be largely things around the military space, but it has, encompassed or expanded to non-military threats. I mentioned earlier of food security, that is a national security issue. And then it has also grown from just mere protecting critical national infrastructure to building capacity to win the information war, which is a very important thing in these times. Also, national security now, like I said earlier, encompasses both military and non-military threats. So we look at the securitization of cyberspace. Like I said earlier, securitization is basically, capturing a domain that was hitherto not captured, as part of national security. And in this case, cybersecurity, it is no longer an isolated debate. It is at the heart of national security because it's also at the heart of the modern economy. It's also noteworthy to mention that the internet itself, which is at the center of cybersecurity itself, is a military project. What started as the internet was the ARPANET, and ARPANET was the project of Department of Defense, DoD, at the time in the United States. Even other succeeding networks, MailNet, NSFNet, all of them all had military roles in that regard. So securitization, it's important also to mention that it's not necessarily militarization. Militarization is when you build capacity for offensive operations. So you use your cyberspace, you're not bothered just about protecting it, but you're also using it to launch attacks yourself. And it's also noteworthy to mention that there are nation states who have these as at the center of their foreign policy. The fact that they can decide to bring down an entity or an economy just to give them a leverage for negotiation. There are nation states that use that as a key part of their foreign policy. So cybersecurity is now at the heart of national security. And if you take your mind back to the NATO's 1999 intervention against Yugoslavia, that was one of the very first place where, the information war was properly digitized and became mainstay. Also, national security moved from military threat, like I said earlier, to non-military threat. And if we also look at another thing that has shaped the cyberspace lately, if you look at the figures, there's been a ramp in terms of attack of critical national infrastructure from around 2021, and that's down to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Most often, we see, because the fact that the physical war is fought in parallel with the cyber war, we often see the physical war manifestation because that's what the television captures. But there's a lot going on in the cyberspace in terms of the cyber war between both countries, and not just both countries. Sympathizers to either of the two are also at the receiving end. So in terms of looking at some of the major cyber attacks, it's something that is happening almost on a daily basis. So I just picked 2 months, and courtesy of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, I just picked some of the recent cyber attacks. I picked for February and March 2023. In February, an Italian revenue agency website was attacked. Also in February, Russian hackers deployed malware to steal information from Ukrainian organization in a phishing campaign. And same month, pro-Russian hacking group Kaunert claimed responsibility for DDoS attack against NATO networks used to transmit sensitive data. Also in February in Nigeria, where the presidential election took place, the Minister of Communication and Digital Economy did lay claim to the fact that the country was under a barrage of attack. According to him, almost 13 million attacks were directed at Nigeria the days leading to the election and the day after the election. While that number is still being interrogated and is subject of further debate, but his office is such that you cannot just neglect what somebody in his capacity will say. Also, phishing campaigns. Latvian officials claim that the Russian hackers launched a phishing campaign against its Ministry of Defense, and hackers also launched a ransomware targeted at the Technion University in Israel, demanding 80 million Bitcoin. I think that's about 1.7 million United States dollars to decrypt the university's files. In March, French Assembly website came under attack by a DDoS attack. Also in March, Chinese hackers targeted people in Mongolia, Papua New Guinea, Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria. Also in March, Polish tax website was attacked, and the Poland authorities blamed Russian hackers for it. And same March, EU Transportation Attack, the EU Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, released a report for citing significant threats to the EU transportation sector, with 98 incidents between January 2021 and October 2022. Also in March, Russian hackers launched social engineering campaigns targeting US and European politicians, business people, and celebrities who have publicly denounced the invasion of Ukraine. And then lastly, Estonian voting system also came under attack in March 2023. So what has nations done in this regard in terms of responding or perhaps proactively preparing for these kinds of attack? Different nations have come up with cybersecurity strategies. I just shared a few of them. To the left, you can see that of the United States, which was recently released by President Biden in 2023. At the center is that of Nigeria, released by the Office of National Security Advisor in 2021. And to the right, you see that of the European Commission. Also on your screen currently is that of the United Kingdom, the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2022, and it's built on 5 pillars. 1 is to strengthen the UK cyber ecosystem. 2, to build resilient and prosperous digital UK. And also to get technology advantage, because the fact that a lot of the nation state actors target supply chain, it is important that you have that technology advantage so that you reduce your dependencies, and also to maintain global leadership in this regard in the cyberspace, and build the right capacity to be able to counter all of the threats directed at you. Also, the case of the National Cybersecurity Strategy of the United States is built also on 5 pillars. 1, to defend the critical infrastructure of the nation. 2, to disrupt and dismantle threat actors. 3, shape market forces to drive security and resilience, still looking at supply chain risk. And 4, invest in a resilient future. 5, forge international partnerships to pursue shared goals. Cybersecurity is a cross-border issue, and it's important that you have this as your cardinal pillar, which is to ensure handshakes with your global partners. That of the EU cybersecurity strategy, you have 3 action areas. 1, resilience, technological sovereignty, and leadership. 2, building operational capacity to prevent, deter, and respond. And 3, advancing a global and open cyberspace through increased cooperation. So I'll end with a quick few parting shots. 1 is that nation-state actors continue in their brazen cyber attacks, as the figures have shown of late. Also, cyber attacks directed at critical national infrastructure continue to be on the rise. And as reported by Microsoft, cyber attacks targeting critical national infrastructure doubled in 2022 from 20% to 40%. And ransomware hit 649 critical infrastructure entities in 2021. This is by FBI IC3 Center. And then another disturbing report, which was captured by the 2022 IBM Cost of Data Breach, shows that most critical infrastructure lags in terms of zero trust implementation. So that means that most critical infrastructure are quite vulnerable, and you know that the adversaries are aware of this. And then very importantly, IT supply chain risk, it's come to the fore very, very of late. And you have the chart below, which is a disturbing chart, which shows a report by Trend Micro, a 2022 report by Trend Micro, which shows that 89% of the companies that were surveyed in terms of manufacturing electricity and oil and gas all say that they were affected in one way or the other by supply chain attack. So you see manufacturing 89%, electricity 89%, and oil and gas 88%. This is at the heart of national security, and this is something that hackers, and sometimes these are organized groups, these are civilian groups, this may be nation state actors, putting whole sectors at the heart of national security on the real threat. Also, another very important chart. These charts were extracted from the Microsoft Digital Defense Report 2022. It shows in terms of sectors, industries that were targeted by nation-state actors now. The top of it is information technology at 22%, think tanks and NGOs at 17%, education at 14%, government at 10%, finance at 5%, and the others as shown on the chart. Also, another important chart which shows the trends in terms of critical infrastructure attack. You see your critical infrastructure is that's the deep blue bars. You see a steady rise, and you see it peaking around July 2021 to June 2022, which is in part due to activities between Russia and Ukraine. And finally, nations need to enact relevant laws in this regard, in trying to make sure that they're prepared for the cyber war or cyberspace. And then there's also the need for closer cooperations by nations of shared values and interests. Also the need to build cyber resilience, and then the need for closer cooperation and handshake between nations, and the need to build technological capabilities, and as well as bridge cyber skills deficit. There's a lot of deficit in terms of cyber skills among nations of the world. There are lots of unfilled cybersecurity jobs across the world. So it's important that nations make a deliberate, step towards bridging this. And also, preaching of, cyber hygiene, not necessarily at the government level, but also down to the citizens level. So once more, thank you for the opportunity to present this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. I think that really kicked off our discussion. So thank you very much. How we're going to do that with the second presentation, Tombari? Are you going to show it on your computer?
Yes, I'm ready. So just hold on. Okay, so this is the presentation, but by Dr. Muller. So I'm playing it right away.
Hello, my name is Dr. Raschid.
You can just increase the volume a little bit. Tombari, can you increase the volume a little bit because I can't really hear very much.
Okay, you're having audio problems at your end, right?
Yeah, I can't really hear it.
Okay, I think what to do is if Dr. Ethem is ready, maybe he can take over, and then we can extend the question and answer time, if that's okay.
I'm happy to do that. Just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Christian, I'm sharing my screen.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Just a minute. Close this one. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today. I am Dr. Ethem Ilbiz. I'm a senior research fellow in International Center for Policing and Security. Today, I'm going to talk about an hype topic, which most of you are really hypnotized with its usage. I will talk about generative artificial intelligence, which is now in practical terms seen as ChatGPT. And I would like to talk about dark side of this new technology in hybrid threats. This is a new topic for me. I'm just trying to develop some arguments. So apologize if I can't not able to express all the details, but in the future, I will share more information about that. So ChatGPT is defined as a large language model. It is developed by OpenAI, a private company, and released in November 2022. Large language model is a subfield of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is an umbrella term that covers deep learning, supervised learning, machine learning, neural networks, which they act like a brain. So this is a huge area, and large language model is, or generative artificial intelligence is just part of it. What ChatGPT do, it's capable of processing and generating human-like text. So when you give a basic prompt to ChatGPT, it generates a text like a human being. It's not just about generating a text. Also, if you provide the right prompt, ChatGPT also improves a code or develops a code. So it can be used also in the cybersecurity domain as a production of code or developing a code. Now, ChatGPT is in a primitive stage, and it could only answer the basic questions, and the program is now struggling to produce advanced analysis. In order to get the right answer, you need to use the right prompt from ChatGPT. According to the programmers, ChatGPT doesn't answer questions that have been classified as harmful or biased. However, these safeguards doesn't mean that can be circumvented by using different methods. If you change the prompt or rephrase it, maybe you can still get the answer from ChatGPT. Even you change the prompt, there are lots of possible ways that it's based on your imagination how to generate new prompts and get your answer from ChatGPT. Okay. So why ChatGPT or large language models might be a problem for us, especially in the hybrid threat era? So when we look at the disinformation campaigns, manipulation of public perception, hybrid threats are generally defined as a combination of conventional and non-conventional war strategies in order to achieve the political objectives rather than engaging in a conventional warfare. The reason why some of the nations are preferring hybrid threats is there's a power asymmetry between different countries, and the weaker side generally prefers to rely on hybrid strategy, hybrid warfare strategy, or hybrid strategy. When you use these opaque, surprising, and unpredictable nature of attacks, it also amplifies the capabilities of the weaker actor. The hybrid warfare strategy also aims to exploiting the strategic weaknesses of the adversary. So before conducting any attack, the attacker generally finds the weak spots of the adversary. The main target, the main of this strategy is undermining the self-confidence of the rival nation. Right now, in hybrid warfare, we are seeing use of proxy actors, so that artificial intelligence will change the proxy actor dimension. And hybrid attacks generally gives an opportunity to attacker to plausible deniability. So when they are the person who were catched or arrested, it could give an opportunity to attacker nation that they don't have any connection or association with the perpetrator. So what makes ChatGPT an important technology in the hybrid threats? I think the main reason is it gives them low barrier accessibility for malicious actors. First thing is ChatGPT speed up the research process. So if you ask a key information for exploitation, it gives a much detailed explanation that maybe you might not find yourself very easily. This technology is also open access source. They are most of the technology companies providing this technology freely available on internet. And it's not really difficult to access this technology by malicious actors. If you are capable of writing the right prompts, especially if you want to create or develop a malicious software, malware, you don't need to know a code. So if you give the right prompts, the ChatGPT provides an advanced coding for you that you can use it for exploitation. Sometimes, as I said, there are some safeguards, but that doesn't mean that safeguards can be bypassed by the malicious actors, because the technology doesn't understand it doesn't understand your intention. If you use the right prompt, it still generates a code for you that you can use it. And as I said, as the technology advances, we will see more developed and improved technology in the long run, which might that technology a little bit dangerous in terms of hybrid threats. So how this ChatGPT or generative artificial intelligence can be used as a hybrid threat by these malicious actors? First of all, this technology can generate authentic text. And if we are trying to use it for phishing attacks, that makes a really useful tool for the malicious actors. So think about that, somebody's patterns of writing, then if you, by using the ChatGPT, you can impersonalize that person. Especially when we are talking about the phishing scam, that technology can be used for messaging, responding to any questions. So it pretends like the person it imitates. This technology also provides a very scalable answers. So when we are talking about the fake social media engagement or a campaign, you can easily produce lots of output using the technology. So you don't have to be, you think about it. It gives different variations of that text, and you can use it as it is coming from different people. It also impersonates a style of speech of the person. Sometimes we see that, especially the deepfake technology allows these malicious actors to imitate the person's voice or its image. That's why it makes this technology a little bit dangerous to use as a hybrid tactic. There is also another discussion about the generative artificial intelligence in terms of synthetic media. In this context, if this technology is integrated with the chatbots, which have some abilities like seeing and hearing, they can also produce a deep fake content. Like they are taking some content from out there, manipulating that content and sharing in a big disinformation campaign. So even there is no human being involved in this attack, that technology can be used for disinformation campaigns, and it is sometimes impossible to find who is responsible for that disinformation campaign because of the nature of the artificial intelligence. So far, this technology is distributed or disseminated by the giant IT companies like Google, Microsoft, but in the future, probably we will see new versions in the dark web. So that's going to be a dark ChatGPT, which might not be controlled by legitimate actors. So when we summarize this, what is the challenges about the artificial intelligence that might be a big challenge for the law enforcement agencies and security forces? This is now at the primitive stage. However, when the technology gets more advanced, it's going to create more dangerous output. So there might be some safeguards taken right now. Otherwise, maybe it might be out of control. There's a big competition between tech companies, especially for the supremacy and market dominance. And that competition sometimes generating an artificial intelligence technology which may be out of control. That's why maybe the speed of this competition should be low in order to control the technology. And for instance, Elon Musk is complaining about Google that they are trying to create an artificial god. So these concerns should be taken seriously. That is defined as an explorative communication. So it gives you can able to gather an information very quickly with a less effort. So technology allows malicious actors to reach that content very easily. As artificial intelligence technology improves, the output will be more sophisticated, more authentic, and it's difficult to distinguish whether it is human generated or not. So this is going to be another problem for the law enforcement agencies and security agencies. There is already ongoing accuracy detection of these tools. So even it is generated by artificial intelligence, it's sometimes impossible to understand whether it is generated by a human or not. And as you all know, that malicious actors generally exploit these disruptive technologies very quickly, and then finding a solution might take a little bit longer for the security forces. And as I said before, safeguards can easily be bypassed through the prompt engineering. So more solutions are needed in order to these bypassing techniques. So what are the possible solutions? So this technology is very new. There is not much solutions right now. But most important thing is high regulatory requirements. For instance, the European Union is currently trying to work on a AI regulation to impose for big tech companies. But main problem is how this regulation will be implemented in the global scale is still begs a question. Another solution might be informing the users that they are interacting with AI. So watermarks, disclaimers, that traceable elements are proposed as a precaution for possible solutions. This is the summary that I would like to make it. And if you have questions, I would like to take it after during the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethem. That was great. And I've seen that Dr. Muller is here. Are you able to present in person, or do you want me to try to play the video?
So good afternoon. So I'm in America, so we're in a different time zone. So my humblest apologies. And I work for the Department of Defense. So they buzz communications all around where I'm at. So, I'm hiding in a place where they're going to let me present. So I do have my slides, but I don't want to make sure that I'm on your schedule. I don't want to take up too much of time, but I do have my slides if you want me to present.
Yeah, that would be great. I've just made you co-host so you can share your slides.
So noted. Thank you very much, sir. All right, share screen. So what I want to do, all right, and go in presentation mode. slideshow and from the beginning. So what I want to talk about today, and so thank you, forgive me for coming on late again. I got a lot of stuff going on, so we get in where I can. So I did an article last December and presented down in El Salvador at the IEEE conference. So I'm regurgitating some information that is still very relevant. I talked about supply chain, okay, and cyber as a threat to supply chain. And so this is kind of a little less technical in nature, but a little more overall awareness of how cyber is doing threat to supply chains. And so I know from a DoD perspective that cyber kind of affects everything. Of course, I saw one of the themes as the critical infrastructures. United States has 16 critical infrastructures. The Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency was set up under President Trump's term in 2018 to deal with that, right? So everything in the United States is not federalized. A lot of private industry when it comes to water, power, some of the things that are federalized are information systems that deal with the people, the digital citizens. We're talking money, government, we're talking Social Security, health, things of that nature. But there's a lot of overlap with respect to things that are not federalized, hospitals, but the overall protection of the citizens who actually go to the hospital. We have HIPAA regulations. We have a whole bunch of things that occur that kind of deal with the citizen of the United States that crosses several boundaries from federal to private. So the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency was set up specifically for that, okay? So the 16 critical infrastructures that we do have in the United States play a major part in securing everything about cyber, okay? What we saw in the 2020 election here in the United States of America was, and at the time I was working in Congressman in the Department of Homeland Security with Benny Thompson, who was the chairman. And so a lot of things that we saw were attacks against the critical infrastructures, particularly that of election security. And so long story short, as you look at the supply chain, we're talking about an ecosystem that evolves and has significant gaps, right? And I always tell my students that when in the classroom that I can do anything in cyberspace. There are two things that I can't do in real time that I can do in cyberspace. And that's one is strong arm robbery, and two is procreate. We can do everything else in cyberspace, right? We can get married, relationships, make money, never step foot in the office. And so when you think about that entire cyber ecosystem and things that we can do versus things that we can't do, we can't commit strong arm robbery with a gun to a person, and we can't, continue the human race. You can do everything else if you think about it, okay? So when I talk about cybersecurity and I talk about supply chain, I want to look at, and of course in this article, the statement kind of dealt with studies and human beings being a part of the supply chain from a socio perspective, but also more importantly, how are we dealing with the threats, right? Because everybody's flocking to cyberspace and everybody's dealing with threats. And so now I talk about the threat and then I talk about the money associated with the threat, and that's how we get to supply chain. I hope I was able to take it at full circle with you, but that threat and that supply chain equates to money, okay? So now as we're looking to have supply chain evolve and look at cyber threats, that's because where the money is, right? It can stop the reproduction of materials, it can stop energy, it can stop water, it can look at all those different critical infrastructures. And these supply chain officers at the C-suite level, we talk about cost, schedule, and performance as supply chain officers. But now we have to look at cybersecurity as that fourth pillar, okay? And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. And I promise to be brief, but I promise to entertain you. So the rationale, again, with the study is, again, as I kind of gave it to you, we're looking at the supply chain officers and how are they literally regenerating their stuff without being compromised, right? How are they looking at everything that they're responsible for. And as you see on my figure here to the right, we're talking about SCRM, supply chain risk management. Okay, so if I'm the individual, I'm the supply chain risk management officer, which I currently sit as in one of the DoD intel agencies. I only have a certain view down, right? I look at, because I'm only looking at money and I'm only looking at budget. But then I may be looking at some high level things that may hit my desk. My CAO may share some stuff with me. My chief technology may share some things with me. But again, I need to be able to look down. And so as you see, we have the systems integrator, we have external service providers, we have all these different entities that the supply chain risk management officer is responsible for at that level. So we have a high level organizational visibility, but we're really not considering cybersecurity. And what I'm sharing in this is that cyber and the supply chain people, supply chain officers, they have to take cybersecurity in as a threat vector to the supply chain as they move forward. So I looked at the perception of supply chain managers from a perspective of, are they aware that cyber is even a threat to their supply chain, right? Because everything is moving through an information system. I looked at supply chain risk management, and I wanted to understand the disruptive behaviors, right? And then I looked at supply chain, cyber supply chain, right? And then I also looked at supply chain strategic enables with national security significance. And when I talk about that defense industrial base, I'm talking about those critical infrastructures. I'm talking about those non-federal entities like water, people who own the land, energy, wells, whatever, mining, whatever, and then I'm also looking at, again, those disruptors that can disrupt that fabric, that everyday core fabric of the digital citizen, no matter what nation you live in. How does it spin up to the supply chain officer? And then he's having to come up with, reproduce or come up with plans to disrupt the food chain, right? Supermarkets have to have food. People need psychology supply. You have to have psychological services. We went to COVID in 2020, so everybody was doing telenet medicine. This is all part of that base, that defense industrial base. Also, you looked at supply chain disruptions, right? So in the United States, the executive order talked about specifically a comprehensive review of supply chains in those critical sectors that I talked about. We look at navigating the future of warehousing, right? Robotics, right? Amazon, it's not just the United States, I'm sure it's around the globe. And if you don't have Amazon around the globe, then there's some other things that are going on that you don't have people working in warehouses anymore, right? So you have these machines that are producing and moving things up, and you're moving your product. We don't understand supply chain until we have to understand supply chain and understand how it undergirds the very fabric of any society in any country, right? And so again, when I reviewed the literature, I had to look at it from several different perspectives. So I know that we as technologists and understand that we have ERPs, we have on the enterprise level that kind of deal with our critical threats to information systems on a higher level, right? We have, systems upon systems, and I'm a systems engineer. We use the DoD architecture framework. I'm in the DoD 2.0. We rolled it out to a couple of different countries, Korea in particular, when it came with specifically with the development of continuing technologies that kind of dealt with the rare earth and the mining and all that kind of stuff as well with chipsets, right? So those critical things, we have to put into a supply cycle, right? So here we have to look at and consider supply chain, that cyber as that threat. We have to embed and consider embedding them together, right? We have ERP, we have DoD, we have defense, right? We have our various entities, but we have to look at that threat against our supply chain and begin to embed that into our various ERPs, right? From a DoD perspective. So that's one of my things that I've written a couple of articles on and said, look, stop treating them separately, integrate them, right? Because now we've integrated, again, we go back to our critical infrastructures, right? Where I talked about the creation of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency in 2018, in the Trump administration. Now that says and forces us to not separate the two, right? And again, that's the whole point of this lecture, is not separating supply chain, traditional supply chain, with the cyber threats that exist, right? Because again, the bottom line is money, all right? So I've made some arguments to talk about, this critical skills gap. I know we have many workforce shortages, right? We have generation, the baby boomers are leaving, right? You have Generation X, which is me. Then you have the millennials, those are born in the late 90s to 2025. And now you have Generation Z is in here, right? And so you have 4 different generations of the workforce. But if you look at the various nations and say, let's take China, for example, right? We remember a time where they were, limiting on child reproduction and things of that nature. But as they got older, you have this funnel, right? You have less people to work, but you have people are living longer. They're living in their 80s and their 90s and in the 70s, 80s, 90s, because medicine has advanced. So, the supply chain, right, of those people they're requiring more, right? So there's an imbalance, but they don't have those people in the lower end, in those 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and 90s, to actually take care of them, right? This is part of the supply chain, the actual people. So part of this research really looked at, again, I talk about holistically, and we talked about the gap. And that gap is you don't have enough people to work supply chain, to work cyber issues, to support the older aging workforce, right? So I don't want to do a death by PowerPoint, but when I talk about supply chain and advancing the knowledge, listen, we are, those baby boomers, they're walking out the door and they're not sharing their knowledge, but then they're living a little longer, but they're not sharing the knowledge because they may be, for various reasons. We're in a major quagmire. We're in a major quagmire. And some of my conversation is limited to my clearance, but we're in we got some major issues going on because we don't have enough people to do the job, point blank, period. And now I think what we're talking about is internationally having some more conversations about international some ISO conversations about how we solve it globally, right? Because it's not just a US problem or Nigeria problem or UK problem. When I deal with people in GCHQ in London, we have these same conversations. We have these same concerns, okay? So long story short, to sum this up, some of the recommendations, as I talked about a little earlier, is that we embed the logistics of the supply chain into these ERPs, right? Into these these information systems, and look at the critical threat factors that apply to both, right? So therefore we can kind of combine the two, save some money, right? Which is all right, because everything is going cloud nowadays, right? We're no longer doing these contracts on computer equipment, all that kind of stuff, and everything's going to the cloud. And so now we have to, our supply chain, our cybersecurity and our supply chain has to mend. It has to intermingle, right? These are major issues that are affecting everyone around the globe. So that was my brief, sturdy, my apologies for coming on late, but again, I'm dealing with a whole bunch of stuff here on the base. But I'm here to answer any questions. Forgive me again for being late, but I got a lot to talk about, and my apologies. All right, I will turn it over. I will stop sharing, and I will take any questions about anything that I shared.
Thank you so much. And I will hand over to Professor Sarah Leonard to chair the questions and answers, and also to raise a few questions of our own.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you very much to our three speakers. So if there are questions, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself or type the question in the chat box. But perhaps as people are preparing their questions, I may perhaps take advantage of my position to ask a question of mine. So I think it's a subject that the three of you already touched upon in your presentation, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the kind of gap between the threat and the law enforcement community. So to what extent do you think that law enforcement is kind of catching up with those new threats? And also, to what extent have the kind of technological cyber advances in your area given new tools to the law enforcement community? I don't know if one of you would like to kick us off.
Okay, let me pick. I think Dr. Muller will have a lot also to say in this regard. Basically, globally, it's a global thing. There's a gap. There's a gap in law enforcement in terms of capabilities. This thing happens exponentially. And if you look at the number, there are countries where, for instance, in parts of most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at the real number of police, first of all, in terms of the number, it's nothing to write home about. And then the next, you look at the technological capability itself, the cybersecurity readiness itself, the readiness of even the justice system and all of the dependencies, it's nothing to write home about. Down, elsewhere, yes, a lot is being done in terms of trying to catch up. If you checked Dr. Muller's presentation, you saw in terms of the gap in personnel. So even if you want to retool and restock your, the law enforcement with more personnel, more cybersecurity experts, you're not even going to find them because there are not enough of them out there. So it's a big problem. There's also the mismatch in terms of the pace of crime, the speed of crime versus the speed of prosecution or the speed of investigation. For a police officer to even arrest someone, you have to get a warrant of arrest, you have to, approach a court, get a warrant of arrest and all of those things so that you're going to avoid a fruit of a poison tree, like it's said in America, where you have to make sure that all of your evidence has to be collected in a legally defensible manner. So these are some of the gaps and some of the challenges that law enforcement will face and will continue to face. The proliferation also of the cyberspace is such that even somebody who is not even, a tech freak, is not even a sophisticated technology person, can just simply go to the dark web using any of the cyber crime as a service tool or the crimeware as a service tool, and able to buy all kinds of sophisticated malware and wreak havoc across the globe and across different jurisdictions. A lot of issues, a lot of gaps in jurisdiction. How many countries, for instance, have extradition treaty with, say, the United Kingdom or, say, Nigeria, where I'm coming from. So a lot of complexities that would always mean that unless there is, and if you look at the national cybersecurity strategy of most of the nations, there is a strong emphasis on getting that global handshake, international handshake, to be able to synchronize the operations, to be able to share intelligence and to be able to collaborate, because cybercrime is a cross-border issue.
Thank you. Dr. Muller?
So I'll take that question a couple of different phases. So I'm a former special agent, so law enforcement officer, and also DOD, retired military naval warfare officer. When I talked a little earlier about the cross-pollination of the creation of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency in 2018 for the United States, that creation of that was if you put your finger in the hull of a ship, you know, and another thing pops open, right? I kind of opened up my conversation with, you know, there's nothing that you can do, and I always share with my students, you can do everything in cyberspace, then you can't do in the real world except procreate and strong arm robbery, those two things. And so if you look at any country, right, you don't have enough law enforcement to deal with the regular crime, right? In the United States, you know, we're horrific with crime varying from state to state. And just based on the formation of the United States and the historical context going back to 75 and all that kind of foolishness. So, you know, of course, law enforcement does not have the capability to actually deal with the issues, which is why we created the CISA, and other agencies have joined with the Department of Defense to deal with the issue at broad, right? So I know with what I do, I'm a DOD guy, but I have insight and work with the FBI and CIA and everybody else with partners to deal with cyber issues on a continual basis, right? So for everyone, I'm a part-time student, part-time teacher, but I do this in real time. And so I'm more like a practitioner / scholar than a scholar practitioner. So my perspective is just a little bit different because I work 40, 50 hours a week, you know, and then I come and write papers on the weekend, right? So that's my perspective. And so what I can tell you is that and give you significant numbers and evidence, and you can pull this up on all the various DoD websites about where we are with addressing cyber issues. I do it on a large scale because I shared that I'm a supply chain risk management officer in the intel community that deals with crime, and we look at the cyber ecosystem, right? We have to look at it holistically. I can't look at individual events. I can just only put my hand in the side of a ship and try and stop the leaks from beginning while we're trying to continuously build and fix what we have. And that's law enforcement as a whole, right? You can't stop everything. You can only see things that come to you, that come to light, and people complain and they make the argument. I've been offended, I've been robbed, I've been shot. That's how. And to answer your question, that's the only way we can really deal with it is when it comes to our attention. And so, do we have the capabilities to do all this? No one does, right? No one has a lock on it, right? Which is why we talked about more cross collaboration around the globe in policy and different things, and kind of try and, try to smother the fire with a blanket, right? That's what we're trying to do, essentially. And even in academically, we can kind of go down one rabbit hole, and then it's going to go another turn and go another turn and go another turn.
Thank you. Ethem?
Yep. In addition to my colleagues' comments, maybe I should add something about there's an obvious talent gap in law enforcement agencies, financial gaps, or technical resource gap. These are serious problems about the law enforcement agencies in the cyberspace. So in order to tackle this problem, they need that resources, and most of these resources are acquired by the private sector. They have talented people. If we are talking about social media platforms, they have the data, they have the digital evidence, everything is almost in their hands. So how could we benefit from private sector resources, and that resources can be benefited by the law enforcement agencies? So this is the main question that we are seeking to answer. So public-private partnership is really important in order to tackle this problem. However, we have a trust problem between law enforcement agencies and the private sector. So how could we solve this problem? And so this is the main question that we need to answer. And it is mostly related with a new innovative governance model that we need to find. How could we develop a resilience strategy that could help us to use both public and private sector resources? sometimes the scale of the crime might be above the resources of the public and private sector. That time we might need the support of public. So that is also another, we should think about the crowdsourcing models to collect data from public and get the information, open intelligence from public to tackle these kind of problems. The final thing that I have to maybe add about this public-private dimension is we need to use technology efficiently. So when we are talking about online child sexual exploitation, most of the police departments have limited number of officers, and they can't able to watch or find the content which is harmful content related with a kid. So we need to use, even the artificial intelligence have a dark side that also have a positive side. So these kind of technologies like artificial intelligence are really useful for law enforcement agencies to analyze big data or huge content. So the resources that law enforcement agencies maybe should allocate it for these new technologies, new disruptive technologies, in order to benefit for investigating the crime.
Thank you very much. Ethem, are there any questions from the audience? So as I said, please feel free to raise your hand or to type the question in the box. Yeah, so Moin, would you like to unmute yourself and just ask your question? It seems there's a question that might be on its way. Moin, can you hear us? So the question is, does anyone know about any terrorist group that poses a terrorist threat to cybersecurity?
So I'll take that.
Mm-hmm.
So I will not name the name of the groups, but they certainly do exist. And I know with the capabilities of the non-state actors, they are very powerful. See, you know, everyone has 5 and 10 of these cell phones, right? So this is the threat vector, right? Everybody's personal identifiable information, everyone's, I do everything on the cell phone, but I have encryption on my cell phones because it's required for me as a DoD employee, and also have software. When we talk about terrorist groups and terrorist activity, and we're talking about it from a cyber perspective, right? So there's a high level of anonymity, from a cyber perspective. So a lot of terrorist groups will not make it known publicly or make claim, as the United States, as we've kind of dealt with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and we understand their technological capabilities when we've been engaged with them in war since 9/11. Okay. We have a playbook, right? It's called the Joint Pub. We have joint publications that are, again, on the internet, and we have a playbook on how we process and deal with enemies of the state. We don't have a playbook on how we identify enemies of the state. And so when you talk about non-state actors, it's a very fine line, right? So we're looking, of course, at IP addresses where things originate, things of that nature. And then also the frequency and the activity of where things are coming from a specific region, right? And so we know, that there are different places around the globe, United States created the onion router, the Tor router, right? So you can't really track things, but we reverse engineer a lot of capabilities, right? At least the things that I do on a daily basis, reversing capabilities and looking for how we do it. But we also have the resources to deploy personnel around the globe. So defining who is state versus non-state is a very, very fine line based on policy. And then when we're doing international, it's more on, as Dr. Sibe talked about, what can we do? How can we exercise influence to define who's state versus non-state based on the policy of the country where we actually land and say, here's where the activity is originating from. So it's a great question, but it's very complex, and it's an international answer based on what the policy of us, the country is, right? Again, it's how we reverse engineer and how we track the, where the signals are coming from. But again, it can be done. It has been done. It is being done. A lot of illegal activity we've been able to decrypt, right, with capabilities, whether we're using quantum resources or not, to figure out the identity. So we're successful in that, but we don't have the people and the resources to do it continuously. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Another question: what do you think about the importance placed on cybersecurity defense vis-a-vis traditional security measures? And do national security budgets reflect the importance of cyber threats, I suppose? Who would like to take that one? Yes, go ahead.
So the importance of cybersecurity defense vis-a-vis traditional security measures. So again, this is infrastructure. This goes back to, tricky. Great question. Okay. Traditional security measures no longer work. That's one, right? Because I talked about everybody has, and then how do you define traditional security measures? But again, everybody has cell phones, right? So everybody's doing their business. It kind of goes back to everybody, everyone has 2 and 3 cell phones and all your personal information on your cell phones. So everybody can be tracked. Your camera, your. I saw another question come about the lawyers of cybersecurity. You talk about privacy, right? So that's a huge question that needs to be researched. Let me first say that. National security budgets reflect importance. Depends on what country, right? I know that our United States, we have, so if you look at our policies over the last 10 years, and earlier in my slides, I talked about the Center for Strategic International Studies, which is one of our think tanks. We also have a Brookings Institution. They've done a lot of studies, but what the United States did is says, we're going to own our studies, but then we're going to invest in our studies. So when your government takes money from their national budget and comes up with, Admiral Mark Montgomery headed, and Senator John McCain before he passed, they put into play the United States legislature the National Cyberspace Solarium Commission, right? So we have a Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which is a federal entity that is paid by the United States taxpayers that does specific studies, right? So a little earlier part of the conversation talked about, having those professionals, right, in the private sector. And I talked about the defense industrial base, those professionals who know and do what they do every day, kind of partner with the government. This is all intertwined. And I talked about that cyber eco chain in the beginning of my presentation with supply chain, right? The bottom line is cyber, the other entity is money. And then how do we combat, how do we use the money and the policy to combat the cyber issues? And so I think moving forward, to answer your question, David, is that the United States, if you look at our executive orders that we placed out under the Biden administration over the last 2 years, his executive orders kind of dealt with cybersecurity, supply chain, resilience. And I think that gives a certain level of how it is reflecting the importance from a US perspective. And I can only speak to that one intelligently.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Ethem?
Yeah. Maybe I should start with Moin's question first. So in the literature, there's a concept or crime type called cyber terrorism. So cyber terrorism is seems to be a really serious threat, and the main definition of cyber terrorism is a terrorist organization is targeting a critical infrastructure in a country, and with that disruption, it might cause devastating impact on that nation. However, when we look at the capabilities of terrorist organizations, most of the terrorist organizations, they don't have that capabilities. They don't have that human resources. Even ISIS, which seems to be one of the strongest one among the terrorist organizations, they didn't have that capabilities to conduct a cyber attack. That's why there's a really serious question whether we should expect any problem coming from the terrorist organization in the context of cyberspace. But they are using the social media or cyberspace for radicalization. That's the place where they recruit their people, they convince people to be part of their organization. So that's the main problem related with the terrorist organization and the cyberspace. As Raschid mentioned, to answer the David's question, there is no distinction between right now with the cybersecurity and traditional security. All the traditional security infrastructure is getting more digitalized. We are talking about a military technology which is integrated with artificial intelligence, coding. So it's not really easy to distinguish what is the traditional and what is the cybersecurity. They are embedded each other. That's why most of the resources allocated for security is somehow going to the cybersecurity.
Thank you very much, Ethem. Any thoughts on the question of the balance between data privacy rights of individuals and national security interests, and how can a balance be reached?
Well, let me try and, okay, I think that's a question by Vanessa. If I read correctly, the first question is, what is the role of lawyers in cybersecurity? First of all, cybersecurity is rooted in law today, as it is. So most of, like Ethem mentioned, cyber terrorism, you have cybercrime. Most jurisdictions have cybercrime defined is an act of parliament, so it is rooted in law. So it's something that lawyers play a very big role. Most of the cases do end up in court. So in terms of the definition of it, in terms of the prosecution and the whole justice system actually plays a very big role in that regard. Then in terms of data privacy rights, one of the unintended consequences of the explosion of data in the last 2 decades or thereabout is the fact that it has come with this inherent risk of breach of privacy. And that has forced different jurisdictions to come with a response. For those in the EU, you have GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which was put together to try and safeguard the personal identifiable information of citizens of the EU. As well, if you come to Nigeria, you have the NDPR, the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation. Even if you go at the continental level and even at the regional level, the ECOWAS region, which is the Economic Community of West African States, do have some kind of policy guideline in that regard. If you go to the AU continent, as the African Union, you have that. If you go to America, you also have it, not necessarily as a national regulation as we have in Europe or in Africa, but perhaps a reflection of the federalism. It is decentralized across the different states. But then issues of privacy is rooted also in most constitutions. So even before data protection regulation came up, they were already accounted for in different constitutions. But you find it that it becomes increasingly complex and complicated with more, with emerging technologies. Dr. Ethem, talked about generative AI. You see that you're gradually losing grip of even the data itself in a way that while you try to, and that's even the essence why all of these regulations, came into being. But if you look at the technology today, even the regulations, and those regulations are not even old as such. NDPRO was 2019, GDPR I think was 2018. But those laws will need to be constantly fine-tuned in reflection of these emerging technologies that will challenge the fundamentals of it.
Thank you very much.
I think in order to answer Vanessa's question, yes, lawyers are really important in the cybersecurity, especially for data protection. Data is really important in the cyberspace, especially the individual data, because maybe we are not aware of it, but most of us are products of the social media platforms. So they are using our data in order to generate their income. They use our data for tailored advertisements. So that's why GDPR is really important. Consent mechanisms and everything is really important. However, there is one little problem that we are not aware of. Even the social media platforms are the artificial intelligence. So these platforms, when they use the artificial intelligence, sometimes the machine learning process collects data even the social media platform doesn't aware of it. And that's a really big problem. Think that you are giving an order to artificial intelligence, giving a command, but you have no idea what kind of a data it's collecting from individuals. The problem is now we are seeing tailored advertisement in these social media platforms. So when you are talking with your partner, your family, when you say something, you receive a product that you have just recently talked about. Think about that in the security dimension, that individual data can be used for tailored attacks. So if the artificial intelligence or the platform owns your health data or a data which is very specific to you, you can be also target to specific cybersecurity threats. So that's the main danger, and that's why the GDPR is really important. And we should be really, we should have the awareness of when we are sharing our data with platforms, and you should not forget that they have to take your consent to use your data. Otherwise, these companies, they can't use your data.
Thank you very much. Ethem, those are very important points indeed. Is there any final burning question as we are coming to the end of this webinar? Alamgir, you had your hand up at some point.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I was just trying to compose the question. Thank you for providing me this opportunity. Well, I didn't understand. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I didn't understand the one point while Rubenson said, I think that there is still a capability issue in state institution with regard to these cyber attacks. Yes. And Ethem said that the terrorist organization still do not have the capability to conduct terrorist attacks. So they lack actually that capability, if I understood it rightly. So I was just wondering whether we are having these threats from more from state actors or from non-state actors? Where are these actually? And is there any? Robinson mentioned that that at global level we don't have any international laws. So he also mentioned some of the solutions that are in, some of them are in the pipeline. So is there any, I mean, how do you see the future of these security threats that at global level? Do you think that there can be a mechanism which can actually help to counter these cybersecurity threats?
Okay, I think I'll take a bit of it. I'm sure that Dr. Ethem and Dr. Muller would also have a thing or two to say about it. First of all, I think Dr. Muller and Dr. Ethem did answer the question exhaustively as to the fluidity of these definitions when it comes to, a terrorist organization, and in this modern context, who qualifies as a terrorist organization. First of all, different jurisdictions gazette these organizations as a terror organization or not. So what may already be recognized in one jurisdiction as a terrorist organization may not be recognized in the other jurisdiction. The next is the scale and the capacity of attack is such that even an individual can do much more than even a group could do. So there's been a lot of attacks. If you look at even 2021 alone, the Colonial Pipeline attack, which crippled part of the East Coast, the East Coast, I think, of the United States in terms of petroleum supply, which was a ransomware basically. You also see attacks targeted at the Florida water system, at the metropolitan water of District of Southern California and all of that. These are attacks that it may have been conducted by just a few persons, maybe not part of what we know as a terror group, but the scale and impact, if they had succeeded, would be very catastrophic. For instance, the water, the water corporation, the water issue, because if they had succeeded and the levels of the chemical, which was at a dangerous level, was actually injected in the public water supply, the scale of, whatever impact that would have been on the citizens would have been very catastrophic. Now, in that instance, that person or that group may not already be known as a terror group, but if you look at the scale and impact and magnitude of the operation, you see that it is even perhaps more disastrous and more catastrophic than what we know gazetted as terror organizations. So there's that fluidity in this current dispensation of cyberspace. So going from the traditional definitions to these current definitions of, taking into cognizance emerging technologies and the current digital ecosystem. I think Dr. Muller should be able to take it up from here.
So Mr. Khan, so what I would offer is that when and I've been, again, dealing with this stuff for the last 25 years, a lot of so now your questions are really more psychological in nature, how we define and how they are using the capabilities of cyber to run campaigns against whomever, whatever, either for ransom or for just revenge, or, you know what I mean? So terrorist organizations do different things for different reasons. And so, again, as a former, retired law enforcement officer, it's all about the person's motivation, okay? And, non-state, so a lot of my non-state versus state actors really depends upon money and resources, right? So this is that's more economic than cyber, right? When you're looking at the psychology of society and, what the wealth gap may be, right? The more crime that exists in a country is based on a lot of unemployment. So you got high levels of unemployment, significantly higher levels of crime, right? And so, if everything was, peachy keen and free and around the globe, and there was less economic disparity, right, then we would have less crime, less terrorist organizations, less attacks, right? So a lot of the answers to your questions are really not cyber in nature with respect to the capabilities that they may have and how you discern between the two, if they have the capabilities to do it, because I know there are plenty of countries that do have the capabilities to do damage, but don't, based on whatever their, their economic is, if I am make say $200,000 a year and have a good job, and I have the knowledge to create an attack against somebody, I can, but do I do it? No, because I'm satisfied with me or my lifestyle, right? Or whatever I'm doing. So it really kind of depends upon an economic disparity that deals with how people are using the capabilities to conduct cyber operations, attacks, defensive operations, or whatever. Terrorism is really kind of based on, there can be terrorist acts and they're stealing data, but no money's asked for, right? So, they're taking data and they could use it over time. That's a terrorist activity, but it doesn't have an immediate impact psychologically on someone. People are filtering and filtering information because we're just gathering information and gathering profiles, which is more psychological. So I don't necessarily know if I've answered your question, but I think a lot of the capabilities that are used really are the capabilities are out there. That's one. Anybody can hack from anything. That's two, with a signal. If you have the technological keyboard knowledge to do it, cool. But the question is one's motivation for doing it, and it has to be meaningful. And I think the higher the economic ability for someone to do it, I think you have less, because they have money, they're less likely psychologically to conduct, those type of operations, versus those who have less money and are desperate and they're frustrated. They have a higher likelihood to conduct terrorism, those kind of operations, and they kind of see their bigger picture, and they, whatever the mantra of ISIS is, whatever the mantra of, the various other terrorist organizations are, if it's immediate impact or over time impact, I think those are significant factors. Over.
Thank you. And Ethem, I don't know if you had something to add, but briefly, because we are already out of time. Thank you.
In cyberspace, it's not easy to distinguish who is non-state actor or state actor. So this is one of the biggest problems. Another problem, yes, maybe we haven't seen the capabilities of the terrorist organization to use cyber attacks. But as I shown in my presentation, that now the technology is advancing and it's providing easy accessibility for malicious actors, maybe terrorist organization members, to write a code. So if they could able to write it with the artificial intelligence without any problem, then maybe in the future, maybe near future, we will see that terrorist organization will have the capabilities of using the artificial intelligence to write code and attack the critical infrastructure.
Thank you very much. And I now hand over to Christian.
Right, so thank you. Just the last words from me. Thank you so much. Thanks to all the presenters for their wonderful presentations. Thanks to Sarah for chairing, especially this particular session. Thanks for all of the participants for joining us. I think it was a really wonderful debate. I very much enjoyed this, and I hope to see you soon again. So stay here, stay tuned, and see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks to you. It was great to hear you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good one, and thank you for the opportunity.